Yeah, let me see where this LinkedIn button is. There it is. Good morning. Happy Friday. We're pumped up. A lot of good energy here. Lots of things to talk about in HubSpot as well. We're pretty good at finding ways to connect them to properties. So we're going to talk about that stuff. Let's build properties in HubSpot with Mr. Ruxton. How you doing, man?
I'm doing good, Chris. It's Friday. It's a long weekend coming up for those of you in the US. I don't know if that translates to any other countries anymore. So I remember saying it's a long weekend once, and someone's like, "No, it's not," and I'm like, "Oh, that's right," because sometimes I forget that I live in one country and everyone else lives somewhere else. I think Labor Day is
Yep.
one of those like weird holidays where like it's not called Labor Day everywhere, but it's like somebody you have a holiday on Monday in most places for some reason. You know, in Canada, like they won't call it Labor Day; they'll call it like September long weekend, which is just
Right.
ridiculous in my opinion. But they just don't call it Labor Day. Like, everyone has the day off because like
Yeah.
Canada works so closely with the U.S. Like if we don't take the day off, there was no point.
Yep. Country borders and boundaries and yeah.
Wait, that's a different
Honestly,
podcast.
I
That's a
can't
different show. I
believe
should not be talking about
I,
immigration. Let's change the subject real
actually
quick.
actually regional regional boundaries. This is not even that hard of a connection to what we're
Mm.
talking about today. Like how many people have been frustrated, like you get this system in place and you try to, for me, it's been a lot of sales channel experience, sales channel conflict, these like lack of transparency across users. You have a support side use case that I think makes sense to share or to talk about
Yeah,
as well. And the key is like, how do we create focus, without siloing all the knowledge? How do we make it easy for users to understand exactly what they're supposed to be doing without getting distracted by information, but also being able to see the information? It's been an interesting path this year as we open up all this permissioning, infrastructure. And now, as I'm talking through it, like this sharing mechanism, which I'll share here, is I think an interesting way to kind of help users. Like, so we've got this update, share contact company deal tickets and custom object records. First of all, that name, yeah, I think I can do that with just taking URLs and sharing it with people. But that they're trying to
doesn't
make it
accurately
easier,
communicate the thing.
right?
Let's just say
And
that.
the
Yeah,
problem is like when I do that, and like especially when a sales guy on the West Coast, right, says, "Hey, I just got a new deal with this company," and uh, well, honestly, they probably just create the company record when they don't see it because they don't own it. But in reality, they could. They're like, "Oh, I know this thing exists. Like it existed in our other system, and now I can't see it." Uh, so I'm like, "Oh yeah, it's this URL, right?" And then I give it to them, and they're like, I can't see that. Like I don't have permissions to see that because it's not
yeah,
my company." Yet we have an initiative to say we're trying to, uh, you know, penetrate further into that company, and they've got locations all over the country. Yet all of our permission structures are based on, made up regional boundaries.
yeah.
Uh, so this is the kind of thing that, like, where most all year we've been like, oh man, all of our workarounds, like, we got to start moving it back, understand how these updates uh, get implemented, because there's, especially with this one, and I'll get your take, like the difference between a new user, like this, the value of this to a new user versus somebody already in the system is vastly different. I think that's always the struggle that the
Yeah.
product team has. But, what did
Yeah.
you think when you first saw this?
Well, this is one of those very like surreal moments for me because this came to front of me via Kyle Jepson. So shout out to Kyle for that. But and once again, one of those things where I was thinking about this heavily, and then all of a sudden was delivered in LinkedIn an update like, "Hey, we did this new thing called sharing things," and I'm like, "They're back to bugging my office again." The So the interesting thing for me is that I come from a world where we've already built some guardrails and rules around users, and I think it's important to walk back a little bit to the idea of, for a lot of people, when you first enter HubSpot, ownership assignment is pre-built. You have a ticket owner, you have a contact owner, you have a company owner. And a lot of people, consultants, coaches, admins have kind of strayed. Like some people are like team contact owner and team make a HubSpot user profile is very specific when it comes to this. And it's interesting. Like, I don't know where you sit on that, Chris, because for us, I found that we can't really effectively rely on things like company owner and contact owner because they change so frequently based on other actions that happen in the CRM. You have things like a conversations API kicks it in, or someone creates a new record, or someone like there's multiple actions that can affect that property. Where it's like you can't say, well, if the company owner is X, that's who's handling the company, because sometimes that's not true. Especially when you go into renewals where like you may have someone in a CS role who's really important, is valuable to that company and is the main point of contact, but the renewal's being run by someone in the sales team. So, you don't want that ownership to flip back and forth because it creates a whole part of things. So a lot of people like myself create HubSpot user properties that are, like customer success manager, account manager. Maybe you have a specialist role in your company for like implementation or things like that, where you might have some sort of role and you want to call those out on the company record. And then use those in workflow automations and say, okay, well, if this person submits a ticket, I want you to sign it to this person, the person that is marked as technology consultant. That way you have routing that's happening in real time and you make sure that people get tickets that are relevant to them. This update is weird for you. If you're like me, you're like, this seems great, but I don't know how to apply it. And for me, I think this is really great if you're coming into HubSpot for the first time. You're maybe migrating from another CRM. Maybe you're coming from a blue cloud. Maybe you're coming from a piece of plumbing. Maybe you're coming from a four-letter word CRM. Either way, you might be like, wow, I can just share my tickets with someone else, or I can share my deals with someone else. But it's kind of an interesting switch where we're more standardizing this across every object. Because for a while, we've had things like deal collaborators for deals where you're like, hey, I want to collaborate with someone on my deal. Maybe you have some companies you have one sales rep for the entire deal. Some you have a sales team. Maybe you have the rep, then you have a software engineer. Maybe you have the name escapes me now. But a technical engineer that comes in, to help kind of scope out what it could look like for them. So you might want to have those all recorded on the deal. And previously, deal collaborator was what you use for that because it allows you to do things like deal splits and ownership and all that fun stuff. Being the ability to share records and grant permission unilaterally to certain things based on who's in that group is essentially bringing that functionality to the entire org. So I don't know, Chris, how you
Yes.
feel about this overall in terms of this is one of those weird updates where I'm like, it's great, but I was like excited and immediately very sad. So I'm like, now I'm going to have to walk back a ton of work if I want to use this as a function. Like, not necessarily that that's a bad thing, because you should always, I think, and most of it, always be adminning. Like you should never be content with the way your administration is set up and improve things like this. But I think it's definitely a big shift that's not a lot of people are talking about.
Yeah. No. And again, like, uh, it's not a coincidence that so much of this relates to the difference between point solutions and customer platform.
Mm-hmm.
Because literally, like, as you describe it, like, deal collaborator serves a very specific purpose, one group in the company, but that ability to create visibility for anybody that needs to collaborate on anything in the
Yeah.
platform without having
Yeah.
to go and, because here's what really happens, especially in small places. You try to set up like the user permissions, and then like you're in the moment, they're trying to do something. I can't see this. All right, you're super admin. Like, now we don't have to worry about it anymore. Like, you can see, like,
I got heart palpitations when you said that. I was like, ah, oh.
that's what happens though, right?
It is true.
In a
It
lot
is
of
true.
cases,
Yeah.
especially when there is no admin, right? And
Yeah.
we're just trying to use the system, and we run into these barriers that don't make sense, like, practically. They make sense strategically, and we're trying to streamline, but usually we haven't done the work. And just the teams versus, individual user, it gets pretty complex. So when I see, this is the first time that I remember, or comes to mind for me at least, that I've seen the update, and it's like this, it's managed based on two new properties. Like, or there's like, what we're doing is you're clicking over here, and then in that moment, like we're creating, uh, or they, I guess they probably already have. Let's just do it real time. But
Yeah.
I just want to just kind of review what it is. So enable admins. This is where like, yeah, man,
Do you ever feel
sharing
like
records will,
ChatGPT wrote this update? It feels very like not like I know I've met a lot of product people at HubSpot. I've talked to a lot of people about HubSpot. This does not feel like something that HubSpot wrote this update. I don't know why. It just feels very like the name. It just feels very like I don't want to say half baked, but it's very much like we rushed it out the
well,
door at the last minute. We just went with whatever we had initially, and like which is weird for HubSpot. I mean, maybe it's inbound. Like I will say, that inbound is like right around the corner. So like I think like this may be one of those things they're pushing out right before inbound because it's going to be relevant to inbound. But
yeah.
yeah,
Well, this is where like I appreciate the forward movement, and I think similar to like error messages that are becoming less informative over time. It's like, okay, what is it like mandatory to be done, and what can we iterate on as it goes? But even
yeah,
like so much of this, uh, like while they are great, they might be a little too great on the feedback loop with the customers, because you can tell sometimes there's a very specific either persona or user type that has asked for this thing,
yeah,
and they knew it would be valuable, but we're still looking at it from their point of view. Because when I see this,
yes,
sharing records will enable admins, that sales situation I just described, I need the sales manager to be able to do that. I cannot go through the admin every time that I want two salespeople to work together on something
yeah.
like that. That's what's scary here. So we're going to test if that's actually true. That might just be the language. And if you,
I based on like what I've already seen in this, I think they're using the term enable admins because I think that is the target is admins. But I will say that because it is a property, you can control access to property on a team-based level and specific users. So I think that this may be a case of you can enable certain people to update this.
right.
But again, it's a
Well, we'll
very weird
see. I think
implementation.
the place where you go and click the share button, I'm guessing, is where the permission wall would be, but we'll see.
Oh,
So why does it matter? Customers today have a number of ways to control which users have access to a particular CRM record. All connected to determine which users have access to communicate with, view, edit, and delete that contact. Despite all these controls, we have heard in certain scenarios that the access controls for CRM records are not customizable enough. We want to ensure that customers are able to provide access for each CRM record to exactly the right users. This is the key. Like, this is the goal. It's a good goal. And it's what a lot of us have been accomplishing when we put like second owner, like whatever that
yeah,
owner, how this person needs to know about this deal. It doesn't make sense to give them access to all deals that they do not
yeah,
own, but we need them to see this one, right? So we create these other properties, and this is where it's like clearly they've learned from all of what's happening in the wild, and it's like, okay, we're going to create some properties to support this activity. So admins will then be able to configure, yeah, which users are allowed to view and edit. From here, users will be able to share records for each object type from the varying locations. It's interesting. Okay, so that's it. And again, it's enterprise. I this makes sense for me just because as you were talking about your use case with tickets, and
yeah,
like, and when you start going to workflows, and as soon as you get into like any kind of round robin or automated assignment functionality,
yeah.
it's like, oh, now this person needs a pro seat, like to Service Hub, just because I'm trying to create a ticket and that's associated with Service Hub. And if they're not, don't have the seat, I can't round robin to them. Uh, Eventually, I do think, like, uh, if we open this back up again, like, honestly, I think they're working towards like this CRM seat, right?
Yeah,
That exists now. Like, most of this makes no sense to be attached to any of the hubs, but they
yeah,
didn't have a way to do it until there's actually a CRM seat. And I think they're
yeah.
going to build into that, because this is straight like
Well,
CRM record, functionality, right?
the interesting thing about this to me is that you have this option to do it in your workflow, and ultimately that means you can branch and have logic in place and all that sort of stuff. But like to some extent, I historically, and I'm speaking entirely from experience, like I try to avoid having points of branching, like branching logic when it comes to things like assignment exist in more than one place. And selfishly, the only reason I do this is because like when you go update it, you know it exists in one place. Something like this means that you may have to have branching logic for your CSMs, for instance, in several workflows. Because, and then you as an admin has to remember that it's in several workflows. And when you go update it, you'll update all of those workflows at once in that situation. The thing I think is probably the better, like I want to make sure that we call this out too, J legacy properties. The important thing to talk about is it does let you share it with a team. Because I will say, full transparency, HubSpot team is a really underutilized property, and this is a conversation for a different Friday call. We could probably talk about HubSpot team in a very different place on another meeting. But I will say that like right now, really, HubSpot team is one of those weird properties where like you can't really do anything with it. Like you can pull a lot of reporting and base your reporting on teams, but you can't really like tell it to set a team. Like it's something that's set on based on whoever the owner is. Having this functionality to be able to say, no, I want to share it with these three teams, and if you have your team set up in a very discrete manner, I think that opens up the door to a bit more. Like I can see like sharing it with a team is more functional than necessarily sharing it with a user in that
Right.
situation. They've
Yeah.
given you both, but I think like share team is probably where the real ask was. And like, well, if you can share it with a team, you might as well share it with a user. So like, I think that's my guess.
Right. And I think this is one way to, like, because a lot of the struggle right now as we move towards customer platform, we have all these the whole tool set like workflows. A bunch of people are accomplishing the same results in very
Mm-hmm.
different ways, right? So for me, as I see this, and we see this new share option, that's what just was activated by signing up for the beta, but it's right next to assign. So if we were to, so if we don't have this, right, the first level
Yeah.
is, assign. And, so much is so many permissions like relate to this specific
Yeah.
uh, uh, piece of data, right? Now, it since we know that, like, and we're trying to standardize the way, we're also trying to make things work the same way throughout the system. Now, I want somebody else. So, like, I assign this because this person is responsible for the relationship with this contact generally, right?
Yeah.
But they need help from others to manage and execute that relationship. So I want other people to be aware. Now I click share, and I should have. Let me just check real quick. I'm interested to see if the properties already exist.
They do. They took a second when I rolled out, but they do exist.
Okay, so they exist on every record.
Yep. Oh, that's part of when yeah, there you go. You have shared team, shared users.
Yep. Oh wow! Like
I will
every
say
record.
props to the team for actually
Oh
doing custom
wow!
objects out of the gate, which is usually that's their favorite thing to do is on a beta be like, yeah, we're not gonna do custom objects. And you're like, oh, really?
This is really
Um,
cool. And I think like it's for like if you're a news user, like what's the big deal here? Like this is the kind
yeah,
of stuff where we know that we need that functionality, as an admin and our team's asking for it. And then we have to go and create these properties on each record, right? And then we have to figure out how we're going to use workflows to automate it once we figure out the process. And let's hope that we've used naming conventions, or we thought of all of the objects this applied to
Yeah.
at first, so that they all got the same treatment, instead of like, oh, maybe we should do this with deals or tickets as well. And we only thought about
Yeah.
contacts and companies first. So all of the naming conventions were based on company, right? Those are the kinds of things that if we can get help from HubSpot like this, in my opinion, to standardize what is trying to be accomplished, like I will welcome that all day. So as soon as we activate the beta, we get those properties across all objects. I'm going to ask my friend Madeline and here we have the teams options. I don't have any teams set up in this portal, but right. But that is like, that is a difference that makes sense. We want more people to be visible.
Yeah.
Maybe we have a whole set of people, right? And that's where it's a little bit different, and maybe why this hasn't been available. Like if the system's set up to manage visibility, between one person based on this property, and now we need to kind of do similar things with the share, we got to open it up to teams as well. It's just like a completely different mechanism, right?
And I would almost say, like, if we look at like my use case for this when I first saw it was around tickets, because I'm like, I think there's a huge ask, a lot of things. Like the best example is like someone goes in PTO who's covering for you while you're out. Being able to share it with a team or like a PTO buddy, if you work in a company that does that, where it's like you have someone who you cover for them, they cover for you. That's kind of the agreement you have. Being able to give them the ability to see, edit, interact with this record, but not remove your ownership of the record is a huge thing. Because I think that if you're working on a metric-based KPI where it's like, I need to know how many tickets you have, you don't want your PTO screwing that up for a month because you had to assign a bunch of tickets to someone else to handle while you were gone. So I think that's a huge reporting benefit by putting it somewhere else. In that sense, what I am curious about though is, like, I have a really good use case in that we use Teams today to split out job descriptions, but also job descriptions and regions. So we may have a team that's nested under, like, we have an operations team, and then we may have like customer success managers today. As your team grows, you might end up with like 20, 30, 40 customer success managers. You don't all want them on one team. And when you set a permission set for a team, if you say, hey, I want it to be, teams are intrinsically linked into permission sets a little bit. So it's like, if you go into tickets, you're like, you can view all tickets. You can edit tickets my team owns. And then you have like delete. And then a lot of times if you're good at it, you don't let people delete their own tickets. Because that's how they screw up metrics. But previously, like in permission sets, you have like edit, like view, and like you can say like my team's tickets, which is great. Right. But if you've gotten your teams down to a point where they're now nested, and that I have maybe these 3 CSMs are the Northeast region, so their team is Northeast region, I can't put them above that because I want them to be specifically, that needs to be their main team. There's a lot of functionality in Teams that requires it to be their main team. Right. Being able to share it with another team while you're out means that you can then say, I don't want the Southeast CSMs touching the Northeast CSMs tickets. But if the Northeast team is going to a conference, I might want the Southeast team to cover it for a set period of time. Let me set the shared team as Southeast CSMs. Now Southeast CSMs can go in there. You haven't changed your global permission sets. You've made an interim change that you can then flip back very easily. Like, that's kind of like one of those, like, it's a very, I'm trying to think, like, so you're going like, what is the use case for this? And I'm like, that's probably it. It's times where like, you don't necessarily, it's interim solutioning versus long-term solutioning. Like, right. You always want Chris to be the owner of this account, but Chris is going on vacation for a week. This account isn't going to just stop working with us for a week while he goes on vacation. Like, business continues on. So being able to say that I'm going to let Matthew cover for Chris while he's gone without Chris losing the visibility into that as an owner, I think is huge. Like, that's where I see this getting used. I don't think you should be using this in replacement of Teams or in replacement of proper permissioning. You should be using it as a interim coverage thing or an interim process like that. I think that's where before you'd had to know you had to reassign these tickets or change everyone's permission sets or readjust their teams in order to cover someone's PTO.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that makes sense. It's definitely not in replacement, but it's to cover like it's basically to cover when those permissions don't work for the situational thing. Because I
Yeah,
could also see like I don't have team set up in here because there's like 6 people in the portal,
right.
right? But I would love to have specific users based on roles. And so in order to get to that next level of permissions, I'm having to set up all these team structures with only 6 people so that I can
Yeah,
start to share visibility. So I could definitely see how, I mean, overall, this is where when they talk about people wanted more configurability,
yeah,
it's we can't count all the ways. We just know like there's times where we need to get granular and say this record needs to be seen by these people, right?
yeah,
And we can't worry about permission structures, especially when you're working on like key accounts and you need to move
yeah,
quickly. And that's where I hesitated to say like, okay, if we always have to go through the admin, that might be rough. But as we read through it, it's like similar to, we should be able to
what
give permissions.
right. And what I'm curious about is what does this experience look like for someone who doesn't have permissions to see share? Like, is that share button just gone? Is it grayed out? Like, can they still see those? Like, because anytime you have a property where you say, hey, it's only like, because you have private to super admins, view all users, view and edit selected teams, or everyone can view it. I think that's the 4 options. If you have this set to view, everyone can view it, do you still have that share functionality? Or is it just like grayed out and then you can't click? It exists, but you can't use it.
Right.
And then to that, and that's what's interesting is like, because they've made it a property, you can essentially say, well, you're allowed to share tickets, but you're not allowed to share companies. Or you're allowed to share contacts, but you're not allowed to share deals. You can get that granular, but it's not
Yeah.
inside permission sets. It's inside
It's not.
property management because you're gonna set that setting inside of the properties on each record, not inside a permission set. That's what's kind of wild to me, is that I've always argued, and permission sets are a great tool, and I think if you have the ability to use them, you should be using them. It makes your life so much easier as an admin. But there are certain things that permission sets are great for. The thing they suck at is property access. You have to go to properties to do that. And while some people say, well, that's the best place to do it, it does create this thing where sometimes you're like, yeah, I would rather be able to assign a permission to someone and not have to go, well, I'm going to assign a permission set, and now I also have to go in and make sure that you have access to these properties that aren't, because that's not a permission set controllable thing. You can't say these select properties. You can assign properties to teams, which is what I generally recommend people do. I say don't ever assign properties to users unless you have a very specific use case that requires a user, which in often cases like approvals. You're doing something like, no, only a CEO can approve this. Okay, so assign that to a person. But when it comes to properties, you need to assign them. I always say assign them to teams because that way you have that flexibility as people coming in and out of your organization. You're not having to go in and like edit and go back and forth, all that fun stuff.
So what you're saying is, um, if it's a property, so where in here would you expect to, even if it's not the share button, just so I'm clear, like where in here would you be able to say this person can share or this person cannot share?
I mean, I guess my expectation would be like you'd pull the contact drop down. Like today, you have like view, edit, delete. They're all checkbox. They're all sliders. There should be an option like can share records.
Okay. Yep. Um, let me see if I can just get here. Okay.
Like when you do that, you drop the caret down. You get here's your 3 options. Um, and then share would be at the bottom there, and then you just turn off on for that.
Okay.
and at the object level. So I think that's where you want to like, yeah, they can share deals, but they can't share. Like here, they've done a
Right.
better job because yeah, I've managed property access is clicked from here. But again, the permission set isn't determining the property access. Property access determines who has access to it. Like sometimes you just want to be like, I want to be able to assign a permission set to someone, and that just does everything. Like you can't associate presets with permission sets today. You can't assign teams to permission sets. Like they're all kind of their own little things, and you have to have like a little checklist where you're like, okay, well, I'm going to send them a permission set, I'm going to make sure they're in the right team, then I'm going to make sure they have a preset, then I'm going to make sure that they have the right property access if that's something that role requires. So it's kind of we went way off topic, but it's something I was thinking about. Like this is an interesting change because they're essentially making it a property access thing, not a user permissioning thing, which seems wild because really it's 100% a user permissioning thing.
Right. Yeah, and that's where I remember there being stuff like this as they started to expand. Like, I want this person to do this thing, and it was some trial and error to figure out which permission would unlock
Yeah,
that thing.
that's always
And it's
this
like,
still exists
oh,
to this day.
right,
There's things I'm like, is this the right permission? And
I
you
gotta
just can't play
turn
that
this
game. You're like
on.
logging in and out.
I don't want them to be able to do that thing, but if that's how I gotta let them create a property. Um, yeah, this is
Oh
super
man,
interesting.
yeah, can only let them create properties in certain objects. That's something I wish existed as a permission set.
Right.
It's that
Yeah, I
you get
think
a piece
that's
of
the
the kingdom
thing.
or none.
Like, they're hopefully will probably need granularity between, like, they can share contacts but not share deals, which I think is what you're getting at. Um,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. Well, either way, this is a step in the right direction, in my opinion. But also an example of how, like, it's not just like plug and play, right? There's
Mm-hmm.
strategic elements to how you bring this into your portal. They've made it very easy to do, thankfully. Like, and those are the little things. Like, if you're accustomed to having to have done this manually, like the secondary
Yeah,
owner that we talked about, like just the fact that we turned a button on and like 15, 16 properties were just automatically created, like, to
yeah.
support this thing. And now I don't have to do that because usually I'd be like, maybe moving forward, okay, this is how it's going to work. Let me go set up the workflows. Oh, I don't have the property in that place. Let me go, make it. And now it's
Oh
maybe
man,
worded a little bit
and $1
differently
for every
because,
time I'm like, let's copy this over, and then you discover that doesn't exist. You're like, crap, I go back into the property. Hold on. And of course, HubSpot's great, but it doesn't update in real time. So like, you got to go like, you got to go. Okay, well, I built all this stuff out, so let me go open another window, build the preferences, go build the property, then come back. Now refresh my workflow and hope that none of the random things
oh
will
man,
delete.
yeah, the refresh
Especially
like
when
in
you're
the
using
middle.
integration partners. Not to shame any particular integration partner, because QuickBooks falls in this category a lot. Where like you'll make a change, but like if you don't publish the workflow, it sometimes forgets that you asked it to do things, and you're like, "Why is this not working? Like, it's not set."
Yes. So again, see the value here. This is exciting to see things like this happen, kind of in the face of all the permissioning infrastructure that has been created. Like, it creates a lot of opportunity to manage things more effectively, but also a lot of opportunity to silo the hell out of your organization. And things like this kind of recognize that line is there, and it gives you an
Yeah,
opportunity to have some flexibility, right? So this has been fun. I'm really excited to see how this one gets used. I think this is I feel like end of the year I need like a workaround, like death day, like, and just have a series of episodes about, which update, like, led to your, workaround removal this year. There's going to
I
be a
think
lot. So,
it, I think that it's hard to think as like consultants, as coaches, as administrators. We often like take pride in our workarounds because we're like, yeah, I made this work. HubSpot didn't want to make it work. I made it work. And then HubSpot's like, yeah, but now we made that thing. And you're like, oh, okay. It's like sad. It's like your adopted child has been taken away from you, And you're like, yeah, but like that was my baby. Like you know how many hours I spent getting this to work just right, and the amount of records I screwed up and had to like re-audit and like go back and change it. And you just like roll out an update that fixes it. It's ultimately a good thing for HubSpot. It's a good thing for people who use HubSpot. But yeah, I think it's as users, administrators, like we very much get a little sad. There's always a little twinge of sadness when that happens because you're like, man, I worked so
Yeah,
hard
I
on
think
this
take
workaround.
solace in the fact that you probably contributed to new
Yeah,
users
like
no longer having to build those workarounds.
yeah, still waiting for today's date. I will beat that drum forever. I think everyone will. I think everyone who posts on LinkedIn, so I apologize for not giving context or credit here, but I know someone's like, I've named my today's date workflow HubSpot, $4.3 billion company, still can't generate the current date on a record. Um, because like that's something I'm working with right now. Is when we talk about properties, we have an ask for one of our teams, which is I want to be able to view open metrics. And until you create a today's date property, you can't do that in tickets. You can't see how long has this ticket been open for. And we have this wild KPI one of our teams has right now, which is can I see? It's like I want to see how long a ticket has been open for, and their average right now is negative 9.6 hours, and which means that they are answering tickets before someone has thought to submit it. And the only reason
Man,
that's happening is because like my today's date workflow is based on a date property, not a date time property, and the date time is midday. So it's like or it's
that
midnight.
team needs a
So like
raise.
it's I mean that's what I said. They're like we need to reduce your how do you reduce an SLA that's already like impossible?
Uh,
I'm like you wanted to go even faster than like before they even think of the question, you've already answered it.
where's our
Um,
continuous improvement for ESP, Matthew?
yeah, like
Um,
where's that in your KPI plan? But yeah, it's like that's like something I think about a lot is setting date and time and things like that for
yeah. Well, that sounds like
like things that are open. But
we'll have an
we'll
episode
get
just
there.
for that at some point.
Oh man,
But this has been
maybe even an
fun.
hour long.
Yeah,
Strong thoughts.
yeah.
Yeah, it's always
Maybe
fun, Chris.
that'll be a good like open forum feedback session for people.
Oh
But
yeah,
yeah, this is good. I'm glad. Always something to talk about on Friday mornings after a week of updates. Uh,
yeah,
and this is seemingly it's hard to overstate sometimes. Like the smallest changes feels like it's small, but just this has a huge impact for new users
yeah,
and
yeah,
old. So hopefully this conversation helped you think about it a little bit before you just dive in, or it gets you to dive in. Maybe you were uncertain about some things. So as you're thinking about, visibility across teams, across records, find the opportunity and let's grow. Have a great weekend,
yeah.
everybody.
Take care, everyone.